This show is a part of the Quite the Thing Media podcast network.
Margaret was last seen boarding a bus to meet a stranger she had hoped to babysit for. More than 4 decades later, the FBI still hasn't found Margaret. They're baffled. But in 2019, authorities released new evidence in hopes that it could be the key to cracking the unsolved mystery abduction of Margaret Ellen Fox. It was the summer of 1974 in Burlington, New Jersey. School was out for the summer. 14-year-old Margaret Ellen Fox and her cousin Lynn Park racked their brains in hopes of coming up with the perfect idea to make some money over the summer vacation. Both girls were excited. It would be their very first job opportunity to earn money and spend however they chose. The plan was decided. On June 18th, the girls posted an ad in the local paper. Babysitters. Experienced. Teen girls, love kids, work at your home. Followed up with each girl's home phone numbers. The next morning, a man identifying himself as John Marshall called the Park home. He stated he and his wife needed a sitter for their 5-year-old son in their Mount Holly home. The offer was $40 a week, which would be about $200 nowadays. Although Lynn was thrilled with the offer of $50 a week, her parents, not so much. Her parents didn't give her permission to take the job because it was out of town and they didn't know John Marshall. John tried again. This time, calling Margaret's number, and unlike Lynn, Margaret's parents reluctantly gave their permission. Margaret was asked to start that weekend, but not long after the date was set, John Marshall called to reschedule for that following Monday, June 24th, due to a death in his family. The Fox family didn't think much of it. The big day finally arrived, and Margaret got herself ready, wrote a note for her parents, and then her and her brother walked to the bus stop at the intersection of High and West Broad Street, which wasn't far from their home. Her brother saw her get on the bus, and that was the last confirmed sighting of Margaret by someone who knew her. Once she reached Mount Holly, Margaret's instructions were to get off the bus and make her way to the corner of High and Mill Street to meet Mr. Marshall's wife. She would be driving a red Volkswagen. From that point, the plan was for Mrs. Marshall to drive her to the Marshall household, introduce her to her son, and have her home by 2:30 at the very latest. Margaret was also supposed to call home when she made it to the Marshall's residence, but that call never came. One may have assumed Margaret simply got caught up in the excitement of her new job and forgot that important detail. But once 2:30 came and went, and Margaret hadn't arrived home, things started to unravel. The family began to worry. About 3:30 that afternoon, Margaret's mother decided to call Mr. Marshall's phone number, only to be told by the person on the other end that there was no one by the name of Margaret Fox, or John Marshall for that matter. Confused by the information, Mrs. Fox called again, and this time was told she had been calling a supermarket payphone. At this point, panic set in. Margaret's mother began frantically calling anyone with the last name of Marshall in the Mount Holly area, while Margaret's father drove there to do a ground search. And for years after Margaret's disappearance, her father would drive around for hours all over South Jersey with his daughter's picture plastered on his car with a bullhorn, asking for help in locating his little girl. After coming up empty, the family called the police. For the sake of the investigation, all possibilities needed to be explored. When teenagers go missing, the first question is, did they simply run away from home? But according to the Fox family, Margaret had no reason to, and although she was shy and she was bullied at school, she was very well adjusted and had a great relationship with her family. And as far as her family knew, she hadn't even started dating, so it seemed unlikely that she would run off with someone. The next question was, did she even make it to Mount Holly? Now, keeping in mind that her brother watched her board the bus with his own eyes, police questioned some residents near High and Mill Street where Margaret was supposed to have disembarked. And several of them remember seeing a girl fitting her description get off the bus around the time Margaret was scheduled to arrive. A woman that was on the bus said she remembered talking to Margaret after her son had pulled her hair. Another passenger thought he saw Margaret get off the bus at Mill and High Street, which was the stop Margaret was supposed to meet John Marshall's wife. He was also pretty sure he saw her talking to a man in a red sports car. A few others also saw a girl that matched Margaret's description at the intersection. With that said, there's no denying John Marshall, or whoever he was most likely responsible for Margaret's disappearance. But unfortunately, all they had on him was his fictitious name, and that from the sound of his voice, he seemed to be between 35 and 45 years old. And he may be driving a red Volkswagen. Not much to go on. It was assumed that he was using a fake name, and by all accounts, the man was a phantom, a ghost of sorts. That is until June 28th. 4 days into Margaret's disappearance, the Fox household received a call from a man, and while he refused to identify himself, it seemed like it was none other than John Marshall. Mrs. Fox had picked up the phone, and this is what the person on the other end said.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the butter topping. Who is it?
And that was a very short recording, so I'm going to play it again.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the butter topping. Who is it?
$10,000 may be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping. The clip is brief, but nonetheless disturbing. The caller wanted $10,000 in ransom, which is the equivalent of about $50,000 today. This message was reiterated again the following day when the Fox family received a ransom note in the mail that repeated what was said on the call and added that the $10,000 should be placed in a box with a blue ribbon. The letter was signed "So Long Again," with the emphasis on the letters S, L, and A. This was never actually confirmed, but between 1973 and 1975, there was a left-wing terrorist organization called the Cebuenese Liberation Army which is known by its acronym SLA. They committed several crimes such as bank robberies and other acts of violence. 4 months before Margaret was missing, the SLA became internationally notorious for the abduction of a 19-year-old granddaughter of a publishing magnate, William Randolph Hearst, which is, you guessed it, Patty Hearst. So anyway, the fingerprints were lifted from the letter, but no match was found. The family, of course, was willing to pay, but no clear method of delivery was outlined. On July 1st, just a couple days later, another letter arrived in the mailbox. This time, it said that the deal was off and that the Fox family had, quote, goofed. But the most chilling thing about the letter is that it once again reiterated the line about bread and butter, but in past tense. $10,000 was a lot of bread, but your daughter's life was the buttered topping. From here, things seemed to go cold aside from a small and very brief lead in 1975 involving an ex-con named Charles Cobridge of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. In November that year, Charles confessed to the kidnapping and killing of Margaret Fox, but investigators quickly uncovered that this was impossible since Charles was in the hospital the day of Margaret's disappearance. As a result of all this, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his false claim. This aside, the authorities, as well as the Fox family, had absolutely nothing to go on. There were other reports of someone trying to lure girls to a fake babysitting job at the time. However, that too went nowhere. Their independent searches came up empty, and even with the FBI now involved, nothing seems to be surfacing. All they had was the ransom call, but investigators couldn't even be sure it was the same person who answered Margaret's ad. Now keep in mind, Margaret's disappearance was already in the news, and detectives were open to the possibility that this was either a prank or perhaps someone completely unrelated as looking for a profit from someone else's tragedy. Luckily, the call was recorded by investigators who anticipated that this may happen, and although Mr. Fox had spoken to John Marshall directly, he was unable to confirm if he and the ransomer were the same person. There was another lead to quickly get dismissed because it was deemed to be more of an odd coincidence. Remember I mentioned the fake number John Marshall provided was from a payphone at a grocery store. So the officer on the case was quite familiar with this since his friend of 25 years worked there as a manager, and his name was Jack Marshall. Naturally, this made everyone suspicious, and Jack was brought in for questioning. He provided an alibi for the morning of Margaret's disappearance and took a polygraph and passed. He was quickly cleared. Jack was not only a longtime friend of the officer on the case, but interestingly enough, many other people in town also vouched for his innocence, including Margaret's sister-in-law, who coincidentally was a friend of Jack Marshall's. There were no further leads. 4 years later, a suspect emerged. He was a sex offender who lived near the bus stop where Margaret was supposed to meet John Marshall. Besides his criminal record and the fact that he lived close to the location Margaret went missing at the time of her disappearance, he drove a red car. He too had an airtight alibi for the morning Margaret vanished and was cleared as a suspect